Hey y'all, welcome to Killer Queens, a true crime podcast. I'm your host, Torella, and like most millennials, I've always had an obsession with true crime. On KQ, you'll find light true crime stories, millennial hypes and gripes, some adult language, and maybe a special guest here and there. Just like a 90s sleepover, we're just a couple BFFs hanging out, so gather round and let's launch right into it. Oh my gosh, you guys. We are covering the update of the Brittanee Drexel case because it is finally solved. Thank goodness. First, I've got some trigger warnings for you. We are going to be discussing sexual assault, child abuse, and child sexual assault. And I want to give a hey girl thanks to Madison for writing this one up. And interesting fact about this case in particular, this is the case that got Madison really super into true crime, and I believe what actually led her to KQ, because we did a 2-part on this case a few years ago now, and it obviously at that time was not solved. We delved more into her friend group and that kind of stuff, and also another person who was a suspect for a long time. And those had absolutely nothing to do with it. So very interesting. I mean, obviously you try to piece together what happened, but anyway, so that is how Lil Madison found us. So this one's kind of full circle and was a really, really important case to her as well. It was something that she followed for quite a long time, obviously. And now it is solved. In April of 2009, 17-year-old Brittanee Drexel left her home in Rochester, New York to spend spring break with friends in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, despite her mother telling her that she could not go. Less than 48 hours after she arrived at her destination, Brittanee disappeared, seemingly off the face of the earth. For 13 years, Brittanee's case went unsolved, with several people being wrongly suspected of being behind her disappearance. Finally, the FBI has been able to charge someone with her murder and bring Brittanee back home to Rochester. All right, we're going to jump right on into it. Brittanee Marie Drexel was born on October 7th, 1991 to Dawn Drexel and John Kayaglu. I'm not totally sure how to say his last name. Dawn's pregnancy was unexpected at the time, and both she and John were really young when Brittanee was born. When Brittanee was 2 years old, John and Dawn ended their relationship and unfortunately lost touch. This is upsetting to me. I don't know how you just lose touch with the mother of your child, therefore losing touch with your child as well. That's a tough pill to swallow. Fortunately, though, not long after they split up, Dawn met Chad Drexel. So Dawn and Chad got married, and Chad did not hesitate in his decision to adopt Brittanee. And she considered Chad to be her father. That's who she called Dad. Chad and Dawn had 2 children together, a girl named Marissa and a boy named Cam. Marissa was about 6 years younger than Brittanee, and Cam was 12 years younger than his oldest sister. Despite their age differences, though, they were all really close, and Brittanee was especially fond of her little brother. Marissa said Brittanee was very caring, that she was always their protector. The Drexel family lived in Rochester, New York, specifically in the suburb of Chili. You want to know how long it took me to figure out how to say that the first time I covered this case? We're just not going to talk about it because it's embarrassing. But it is a different kind of way of saying it, but it's spelled like a chili cook-off, so that's confusing, but it's Chili. Brittanee was a junior at Gate Chili High School, where she was a star on the soccer team. Despite being only 5 foot tall and just over 100 pounds, Brittanee moved fast up and down the field. She played right winger on the team, and her soccer coach marveled at how strong she was. She scored 26 goals in 1 year, showing everyone that she was, though she be little, she be mighty. I cannot even imagine. Even at 17, I can't imagine running like that. I think my body would simply give out. So, pretty incredible. And it's also really sad because, okay, she was strong. She was fast. She was athletic. And she was also a spitfire. People around her, that's how they described her, that she was a firecracker. She also had this very warm, welcoming personality that people would gravitate towards, but she was not afraid to stand up for herself. She was not afraid to hold her ground. She didn't back down from a fight. And it's just so sad that she was still taken, you know? I think that sometimes you can look at somebody and be like, okay, they're good, right? I mean, even boys, like I have 2 boys, they're young right now, but even like college age and stuff like that, I never would have worried about my husband walking home by himself from a bar, right? We weren't married yet, but you know what I mean? He worried about me, but I never would have worried about him. But something could have happened to him. Like, yes, he was stronger than I am, but that doesn't mean that something can't happen. So it's like, I don't know. It's just really scary when you think about it, that like literally anything could happen to anybody at literally any time. I mean, life's a bitch and then you die, right? So I don't know. I'm getting very depressing, but it is scary. Me, if I ran into somebody who was going to try to take me, I'd be like, I mean, jumping is useless for me. I'm the female equivalent of Nate Bargatze. If you hear him talk about himself in any way about anything like that, like athleticism or whatever, he is like, I mean, why bother, right? Like that's me. So yeah, no, I have no hope. Anyway, not only was she a tough kid, not only was she a firecracker, strong, athletic, all those things, she was so silly. She would just sing, dance, do anything she could get a laugh. She was really ambitious. If she wanted something, she would go out, she would work hard, and she would get it. She was a force to be reckoned with. When Brittanee was 16 years old, her biological father, John, came back into her life. And this was a huge moment for her. And thankfully, Brittanee was so incredibly happy to have John around. When they began getting to know each other, John couldn't believe how talented Brittanee was on the soccer field. And he actually used to play soccer as well and thought that maybe, she got some of that from him. When he looked at her, he said he felt like he was looking at himself. John was in awe of how beautiful, funny, and talented his daughter had become and was so excited and grateful to be back in her life. And again, I don't know why there was that delay of 14 years, but I guess the important thing is that they reconnected before this happened. In 2009, Dawn and her husband, Chad, began the process of separating. It was a very difficult time for Brittanee and her siblings. She was super, super close with Chad. This is the father who had raised her. This is the person that she recognizes as her father. Despite struggling with this, friends said you couldn't tell that anything was wrong by looking at Brittanee. She was really, really good at hiding when things were bothering her. But her distress did start to come out in other areas. I follow a podcast called Raising Boys and Girls, and David Thomas, who is they're both counselors. It's David Thomas and Sissy Goff. Anyway, love them both. They are local here in Nashville, but Sissy works with girls, David works with boys. So I follow more of David's content because, not that, you can't follow both of them. I listen to both of them, but anyway, David is more focused on boys. Anyway, one thing that he talks about is, sharing emotions and things like that. And he talks about how, typically, again, not that girls can't be told to hold in their emotions, but it is more common for boys to be told that. And he talks about how when you hold in those emotions, they come out sideways. They have to have an outlet of some sort. And so it may not be, you determine what that outlet is and how healthy it's going to be. And that can be very difficult. And of course, with children, we have to teach them that. And for Brittanee, I think because she was such a strong personality, she was trying to stay strong and probably was trying to stay strong for her younger siblings too. Just being the oldest, that's a very common thing for an older child. But hers came out sideways, like we know it will. And hers came out in the form of hanging out with people that were not necessarily a good influence on her. She started partying. Her grades started to suffer. Her schoolwork was not going as well, that kind of stuff. And her new group of friends were older, some of them already out of high school. They were described as the popular rich kids, people who were always out partying at clubs. And it seemed like Brittanee was just doing what she could to keep her parents' divorce far from her mind. And you cannot blame her for that. You know, she's a 16, 17-year-old kid. One of the people who Brittanee counted on was her boyfriend, John Greco. She and John had been dating on and off for about 2 years. And they kind of always, would gravitate back towards each other. They had an on and off relationship. At this point, it was on. So in April of 2009, Brittanee, like many 17-year-olds, was super excited about spring break. And she was even more excited that her older friends had invited her to go on vacation with them. They were planning a trip down to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Myrtle Beach is a party destination if you don't live in the part of the country where Myrtle Beach is close enough to drive. It's got a main strip lined with hotels, motels, bars, and shops, and it's just a few steps away from the beach itself. Unfortunately, Myrtle Beach was about 14 hours away from Brittanee's home in Rochester, though. It's about a 10-hour drive for us, so we don't typically go there, but I've been there a few times. When Brittanee asked Dawn if she could join her friends, Dawn immediately said, absolutely not. And she explained to Brittanee, look, there's no parental supervision. I don't know any of the people that are going. I don't feel comfortable with you going. That's just a no. It's a no for me, dog. It's just not going to happen. And Brittanee was, of course, upset. But Dawn also felt like something bad would happen. You're so far away. There's no way I could get to you. There's no way I know what's going on. It's 2009. It is not 2024. It is not the age of those tracking apps where you can track your kids down to the freaking intersection and stuff like that. I forget what they're called. Is it Life 360 that does that? I know there's apps you can get to track your kids like that. That was not a thing. These were brick cell phones, pretty much. Maybe an LG chocolate by now, but you might still be T9 texting at this point. It's not like it is now. I remember the first time I saw an iPhone, which is that's how old I am. And I believe it was 2007. And the only reason I think that is because I lived in California during that time. And I know I saw it in California because a person who had driven us somewhere had one. And my boyfriend at the time was like, what is that? Because it looked completely different than cell phones that we had, of course. It had a color screen and all these things. And he was like, oh, it's an iPhone. And I remember he was telling us about it. He's like, I really like it. It's so cool and blah, blah, blah. And we were like, that's stupid. Nobody's going to get those. We literally were like, that's never going to take off. And here we are. But anyway, you didn't have iPhones then. First, I'm pretty sure. I don't think I got an iPhone until 2012, 2013, maybe at least. I don't know. So anyway, just saying, it's a lot harder to get in touch with your kids and stuff like that. And also 14 hours away, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But Brittanee was beside herself upset. She's 17. This is the biggest fucking deal in her whole entire life at this point. Everything is when you're 17. And she was so upset with her mom. They got in a huge argument. And Brittanee left the house to go hang out with a friend. So Dawn ends up being really relieved because Brittanee later came to her and said, look, I know I can't go to Myrtle Beach. I get it. Can I go stay with one of my friends in Rochester over the break? There was a beach they could go to there. Obviously not as cool as Myrtle Beach, but it's a little beach they could go to. That's where I'm going to be. I'll hang out there and I'll just stay the week with her. And her mom is like, you can, but I need to speak to her parents. So Brittanee got them on the phone. And Dawn was like, okay, I'm comfortable with this. I've talked to the parent, whatever. Dawn did not know that who she spoke to on the phone was actually one of Brittanee's friends who was pretending to be an adult. So That's unfortunate. So on April 22nd, Brittanee went to Myrtle Beach with her friends. Her mother thinking she was in Rochester with that friend who she'd already spoken to the mom of, right? They arrive in Myrtle Beach on the morning of Thursday, April 23rd. And of course, they're, ready to party, spend time on the beach, all that kind of stuff. Brittanee had asked her boyfriend, John Greco, to come down to the beach with her several times, but he had to work. He could not get off for the whole week. Throughout the entire drive down and first days at the beach, Brittanee was absolutely glued to her cell phone. She was constantly texting John. On April 25th, just a few days after arriving, Brittanee had told John that the vacation just was not what she had expected. She ended up getting into an argument with the girls that she'd driven down with, and she was just feeling really left out. She was feeling alone. She wanted to go back home. I remember from the first time I covered this case that she felt it kind of turned into almost like what seemed like a Mean Girls situation where they kind of ganged up against her. There was some kind of friction and she was the younger one. And it just, I don't know, she wanted to come home. It was not enjoyable for her anymore. She ended up finding another friend from Rochester who was in Myrtle Beach for spring break and was hanging out with him and his friends and was having fun with him. But then suddenly, Brittanee stopped responding to John's texts mid-conversation. Her last text was sent at 8:58 p.m. And John was worried. It was really out of character for Brittanee to ignore his text, especially in the middle of a conversation. He texted her several more times and was calling her, but she wasn't responding. John later said he had an instinct that something was wrong when she stopped responding. He did not wait long until he called Dawn, her mom. He told Dawn that Brittanee was actually in Myrtle Beach and also they couldn't find her. And Dawn was in complete shock. She later told the Sun News, quote, "My heart just dropped. I'm like, what do you mean she's in Myrtle Beach and they can't find her?" Can you imagine how terrifying that is? It's terrifying enough to get a call that says, "Hey, your daughter's missing. We can't find her." But to then find out she's 14 hours away, 14 miles away. We wish. So Dawn sprang into action. This was exactly why she didn't want Brittanee to go to Myrtle Beach. She was so afraid that something would happen to her. And now she's over 800 miles away from where her daughter is. So she called Brittanee's biological father, John, who was in Tampa, Florida. Tampa was obviously far south from South Carolina, but not as far as Rochester. And Dawn just wanted an adult to get there ASAP and help find Brittanee. So John started driving to Myrtle Beach, hoping and praying that Brittanee was just being irresponsible. Maybe she'd lost her phone. Maybe she just wasn't in contact. They'd find her, right? There had to be a simple explanation. She was okay. Maybe she'd lost track of time. Dawn continued calling her daughter's cell phone, but she wasn't getting any answer or response. So she decided to call a family friend who lived at a Marine base in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And she asked him, could you please make the drive to Myrtle Beach? For him, it was about 3 hours. And go to a local police station and report Brittanee missing, because obviously he'd get there way faster than Dawn could. The friend, whose name is also John. So we have Brittanee's biological father, John, her boyfriend, John, and this guy, John. So I will delineate when needed. So family friend John immediately started to head towards the beach. Now, once he got there, he immediately went to the hotel that Brittanee had been staying at, the Bar Harbor Hotel. And none of the girls that Brittanee had traveled with were at the hotel at the moment. He figured they were probably out partying. So he called 911 and a police officer from the Myrtle Beach Police Department responded to the hotel. The officer initially said, can you guys guess what the officer initially said? "We can't take a report right now. She hasn't been missing long enough. She could come back. She's 17. She doesn't get to be missing. And actually, you should take the report any fucking way because she's not even supposed to be in this town. She's 14 hours away from home. She's not supposed to do that. She didn't have permission. Like, come on." So John persisted, family friend John persisted, explaining the situation. It's super weird that she's away from her phone. She doesn't even live here, all the stuff. So the officer agreed to take the report. John made the decision, family friend John, to park across from the hotel and wait for the girls that Brittanee was staying with to come back. And he knew that they had to check out by 11 a.m. the next day, so they had to come back at some point, right? They do. At fucking 10:45 a.m. The life of a teenager, my God. I am beginning the process of like cleaning up, packing up, checking out, all the things at like fucking 8 o'clock in the morning for an 11 a.m. checkout. But when you're like 18 or 19 or 20 or whatever, you're just like, roll back over to your hotel, still drunk or hungover or whatever. Just grab your little overnight bag where you didn't pack away the fuck too much shit, and then you go back home. So anyway, it's just how it is. So they get there at 10:45. I didn't realize I resented them so much for that. That really happened. So he called the police, who responded and interviewed the girls, and they said they didn't know where Brittanee was. They didn't have any reason to detain them. There was no sign that anything had happened in that room or anything like that. So there's really nothing they could do. Now, the friends appeared to not give a fuck that their friend who they brought down there, who is underage, is missing at that point. They go ahead and pack their shit up and they leave. But, you know, who am I? Dawn and Brittanee's biological father were still on their way to Myrtle Beach, both of them frantically continuing to call their daughter's cell phone. They'd talked to all of her friends, who also had no idea where she was. And Brittanee was not answering her friends' phone calls either. They were not sure at this point if she had maybe tried to harm herself. She did have one instance prior when she had taken several of her mom's pills after a bad fight with her boyfriend. And Brittanee was fine after that. And Dawn felt like, you know, and again, she's very young. Dawn felt like maybe she was just trying to get her boyfriend's attention. She said that she seemed more so like she was just being a rebellious teen rather than someone who would run away or hurt herself. When Dawn got to Myrtle Beach, she found that all of her daughter's luggage was still in her hotel room, and this told her for sure something's wrong. Brittanee's not leaving without her belongings. Her hair straightener was there. If you know anything about 2009, you know that you are not leaving your hair straightener. We even had, you guys, I sold so many of these at the salon I worked at. We even had little mini straighteners that plugged into the cigarette lighter in your car for like on-the-go straightening. And I sold the snot out of those things. We couldn't keep them in stock because you never know. Like your hair might not look like you just flat ironed it, and it needs to be so straight. It's insane. Anyway, that was life then. But all that was in her room. There's no way, right? So they start walking up and down the main strip in Myrtle Beach, talking to anybody who would listen, showing them pictures of Brittanee, but nobody knew anything. Nobody saw anything. Police and Brittanee's loved ones were quick to put together Brittanee's last movements leading up to when she stopped responding to her boyfriend. So the group had arrived on Thursday. Then on Friday evening, Brittanee was walking down the main strip alone. So remember, she wasn't getting along with the girls that she'd come down with. So Brittanee had gone to meet that other friend from Rochester who was vacationing at the beach as well. That's Peter. Peter and his friends were staying at the Blue Water Resort, which was about 1.4 miles down the strip from Brittanee's hotel. It wasn't dark yet. It was still early evening. And so Brittanee walks from Bar Harbor, her hotel, to the Blue Water, which is Peter's hotel. Not long after she gets to Peter's hotel, she's hanging out with Peter and his friends. She gets a text message from one of the girls. So while they were in the hotel room hanging out, Brittanee told Peter and his friends that the girl that had texted her was angry, that Brittanee had worn her shorts that night. And she said, I was planning to wear those shorts tonight. I'm wearing them out. I need them back. You need to bring them back. So Brittanee was like, okay. So now she has to walk from Peter's hotel back to her hotel to swap the shorts. Now, I don't know what led to this. Did she and Brittanee talk about this and she agreed to let Brittanee wear them and then changed her mind? Did Brittanee just borrow her shorts without asking? I don't know. Also, it's very common that girls just wear each other's shit. So like, I don't know. But anyway, the girl decided she had to have them and she had to have them right fucking then. So Brittanee walks back. Peter does not walk her. I don't love that. I don't love that nobody walked her. I mean, I guess she walked over there by herself. But at this point, it's 9 o'clock and it's dark. somebody needs to walk with her or drive her over or whatever. Surveillance footage from the Blue Water Resort shows Brittanee walking out of the hotel just before 9 p.m. She's alone, but there's nothing that looks out of the ordinary. She texted her boyfriend to tell him about the situation and was continuing to text him until she suddenly stopped. Despite there being footage of Brittanee leaving the hotel alone, suspicion quickly fell on her friend Peter. Even stranger to many people, he and his friends checked out and suddenly around 2 or 3 a.m. that morning, even leaving some of their belongings behind. This was later explained to law enforcement that one of the boys had exams the following day and he needed to get back to study. While Peter fell under a lot of fire throughout the search and investigation, he did have an alibi and he was cleared by police. Public opinion stayed on him for a really, really long time, and he was even on the Dr. Phil show, and Dawn, I think, was on that show and confronted him and all this stuff. I mean, he does not seem like a gentleman, I will say that. And of course, when you don't know what happened, you're trying to figure out what happened. But he really did have nothing to do with it. And I feel like this is one of those cases where you can look at it now because now we know what happened. And you can be like, oh, wow. Like, I really put a lot of weight in that, and it actually didn't have anything to do with it. But until you know, I mean, of course, you're trying to put the pieces together, but I don't know. I feel like this is a good example of, like, not everything is connected necessarily. On April 30th, Brittanee had officially been missing for 5 days. Reports of sightings were being sent to the Myrtle Beach Police Department, but none of them panned out. With the amount of motels and businesses lining the street that Brittanee had been on, investigators felt that there would be footage of her walking. Unfortunately, most of the businesses' cameras were focused toward the door or inside on the clerks and guests. There wasn't a lot that actually faced out to the street or the sidewalks. They did have luck with one camera, though, that had been pointing at the road. They were able to see Brittanee walking down the main road toward the Bar Harbor Hotel around 9:15 p.m. She had her head down. She was holding her phone. It looked like she was texting. And again, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She doesn't appear scared. She just seems like she's walking and paying attention to her phone. And that's the last confirmed sighting of Brittanee. Investigators did not waste their time in their search for Brittanee. While her family and friends helped, investigators were scouring the area looking for any signs of Brittanee or any witnesses. They were also quick to obtain Brittanee's cell phone records for analysis. The data showed that her phone had been moving south while Peter and his friends' phones were heading west. And this was just another confirmation for investigators that they had not been involved in Brittanee's disappearance. The last text coming from her phone was at 8:58 p.m. and was to her boyfriend. The initial ping was coming from the south end of Myrtle Beach. A short time after she stopped responding, the phone pinged 15 miles south of where it had been, and that shows that she had to have been, or her phone had to have been, in a moving vehicle. There's no way she could have gotten that far that quick. The last ping was off a tower near the North Santee River in McClellanville, South Carolina. And this is about 50 miles south of where Brittanee was last seen in Myrtle Beach. Her phone finally died at 11:57 p.m., just 3 hours after she sent her last message. The area was a very rural, low-country, swampy area. It was full of alligator, snakes, wild boar, and mosquitoes. It was not somewhere that most 17-year-old girls would willingly be, and it certainly wasn't a place that Brittanee would be. It was at this point that things really kind of set in that, like, okay, something really, really bad has happened. Investigators made the decision to expand the scope of their search. They knew that if Brittanee was in McClellanville, it was not by choice. They searched the areas on horseback with searchers armed with guns to keep the wild boar away. The search continued to expand, but they found no signs of Brittanee. After searching extensively for almost 3 months, Brittanee was still missing, and her family had to return home without her. Police continued the search for her, though, knocking on doors throughout the town of McClellanville and talking to anyone that they could. On the 1-year anniversary of Brittanee's disappearance, her family organized a march for her in Myrtle Beach. They walked down the main road with banners and signs with Brittanee's name and face front and center. And Dawn later said that during that first year, she held on to hope, but after that, she started to lose faith that her daughter would be found alive and well. So let's talk about the investigation. Investigators searched the local sex offender registries and they found a name that caught their attention: Raymond Moody. Raymond Moody was a convicted sex offender living in Georgetown, South Carolina, not far from where Brittanee's phone had last pinged. And they found that on the day after Brittanee went missing on April 26th, Moody had been pulled over for speeding in the area of Myrtle Beach. Now, remember, where her phone was found was about 50 miles south of Myrtle Beach. So it's interesting to me that he lives in an area near where her phone last pinged, but he also got a ticket in Myrtle Beach. Like, is he going to, does he work in Myrtle Beach? If he works in Myrtle Beach and he's driving up there every day, that makes sense, right? It's 50 miles away. That's a long commute. Very interesting. A search warrant was obtained for Moody's residence. At the time of Brittanee's disappearance, he'd been living at the Sunset Lodge Motel. And again, this was not far from where Brittanee's phone had last pinged. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, served the warrant and searched the room that Moody had been staying in. It had been over 2 years since Brittanee had disappeared, but they were hopeful still that they would find something. Law enforcement tore the room apart. They pulled wallpaper off the walls. They cut open the mattress. They searched every inch, but they found no signs connecting the room to Brittanee, and it was just another dead end. In June of 2016, the FBI held a press conference in McClellanville. They made the announcement that they believed Brittanee had been taken from the Myrtle Beach area to McClellanville and then that she'd been killed afterwards. Now, they did not explain why they thought this, and there were no arrests made. People found it really strange that the FBI had made such a strong statement without charging anyone, because you would think that they would have that information because they had evidence or information. So it was weird that nothing else came of it, kind of thing. The FBI also offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of those responsible. Dawn continued to beg the public to come forward with information so that she could bring her daughter home and lay her to rest. And I also should say that Chad was really involved in this as well. They were separated, but they were both really, really involved. Dawn moved to Myrtle Beach at one point. And I don't know if she lives there now or if she moved back now that they found her. But anyway, just really sad. But she was begging for people to come forward with information. Law enforcement told Dawn that they believed her daughter had been gang raped, beaten, shot, and fed to the alligators. That is a bold statement. Where do you have this information from? She said that when she heard that information, she could not breathe. She couldn't speak. She couldn't understand why somebody would do that. And she also didn't know why they thought that's what happened. About 2 months later, the public learned exactly what the information was that led to law enforcement's announcement. Federal court documents revealed that an inmate told investigators that Brittanee had been assaulted before being murdered and dumped in a swamp near McClellanville. The informant was serving a 25-year sentence and said that he'd been present at the stash house in McClellanville where Brittanee had been taken to before her murder. He claimed that she'd been assaulted, she had resisted, and then she was shot. Dawn later said that this was presented as fact to her, that this was unquestionably what had happened to Brittanee. The informant pointed a finger at another man who'd been part of an armed robbery at a McDonald's. And when investigators were reportedly able to corroborate some of the accused man's cell phone data with Brittanee's, he became the prime person of interest. It wasn't long before he was charged in federal court for the robbery in hopes of putting pressure on him to provide information about Brittanee. The man continued to deny involvement, even going on the Dr. Phil show to argue his innocence. He was unwavering. His story never changed. The FBI rebutted his denial, saying that there was information pointing to him being behind the murder. In December of 2019, the federal armed robbery case was resolved, and he was sentenced to 3 years for the robbery, but he was never charged with any crimes involving Brittanee. And that man, now again, there are absolutely crimes that he committed, but he and his whole family were put through the ringer in the public eye for this crime. And the FBI was, again, adamant that they had information that proved that he was part of it. Oops. Because now we have to talk about Raymond fucking Moody again. And remember how we talked about him right away? He was one of the first people they fucking looked at. In 2019, 10 years after Brittanee disappeared, new FBI agents were assigned to her case. They started from square one and began examining everything from the beginning. This included all of the suspects that had at one time been considered to possibly be involved in Brittanee's disappearance, and one stuck out to them: Raymond Moody. Raymond Moody had a very concerning past. This is going to make you so angry, you are going to have to throw your own self out the window. And then you will drag yourself back in and you will throw your ass right back out. It is infuriating. In 1983, while living in Vallejo, California, he followed an 8-year-old girl as she walked to the nearby park, then grabbed her and pulled her into his car. He drove her a few miles up to a road, parked in an undeveloped housing development, and then he sexually assaulted her. Fortunately, though, the young girl was able to escape and get to safety. It was found that Moody had assaulted at least 7 girls between the ages of 8 and 19. He was charged and pleaded guilty to multiple charges of sexual assault. He was sentenced to 40 years in the California penal system in the 80s. So in 2009, his ass should have still been in jail. While in prison, Moody developed a relationship with another inmate, Ernie Merchant. Merchant later explained that Moody was very kind, nice, and polite. It was the late 1990s, so there wasn't any access to the internet there in prison. So Ernie didn't know why Moody was actually incarcerated. Raymond Moody had told him that he had been involved in a series of robberies, and that's it, just robberies. As Moody's release neared, he gave Merchant his file, which explained why he was really in jail. Merchant was horrified, but because Moody had taken care of him and protected him while he was in prison, he felt like he kind of owed him, so he didn't really pull back or anything like that. Moody was released in 2004 after serving only 20 years of his 40-year sentence. Multiple sexual assaults of children. And let's give him half. Let's give him half. Let's turn him loose. He returned to his hometown of Georgetown, South Carolina. When Merchant was released, he decided to move to Georgetown to live with Moody. The town was very small and very concerned with a convicted sex offender living in the area, but Moody said he knew it was his responsibility to show his community that they could. We can change, we can live here, we can be productive members of society. Doesn't define me, right? Merchant said that the two of them built a nice, quiet life together, and for a while, everything was great. Unfortunately, things changed in 2007 when Moody's parole ended. He was only on parole for 3 years, and he was supposed to be in jail for another 20 years. I don't understand it. But it was the first time that Moody felt like he was truly a free man, and then his attitude changed completely. He started having an affair with a woman named Angel, someone who was initially a friend of his and Ernie Merchant's. And Merchant felt incredibly betrayed, especially after he'd taken a chance and moved to Georgetown to be with Moody despite his past. In April of 2009, Merchant ended things with Moody, unable to deal with who he had become, or rather likely who he was all along. On April 27, 2009, Merchant heard someone enter his home early in the morning while he was still asleep. He shouted from the bedroom, and the person actually responded. It was Moody. Merchant asked him what he wanted, and Moody said he just needed to borrow some tools. Now, at this point, Merchant was half asleep. He was woken up from asleep, hearing somebody in his house. But he did notice that Moody's face and neck had scratches and what looked like claw marks up and down. He shaved his head. Like, his head was already shaved. He didn't shave his head that day. But with his head shaved, Merchant could also see that there were red marks all across his head. If he'd had hair, it would have covered it up. You could see every single one of them. And so Merchant asked him, where the hell did you get those scratches? And he said, oh, it's just been a wild weekend. Shit got out of control, whatever. It was later determined that when Moody was pulled over for a traffic stop on April 26th in the Myrtle Beach area, he'd had the same injuries. Now, why the fuck I get the pulling over officer has no idea, right? Unless they've put something in the system that's like, we want to talk to him on this disappearance, so let us know if you pull him over or something like that. But if they didn't have that at that time and they pulled him over, I get that the officer that pulls him over has no idea about any of this other stuff. But if that was noted and you as a detective find him on the sex offender registry and say, oof, he was awfully fucking close to where her phone last pinged. And then you find out, and you know, he's been pulled over in Myrtle Beach the same day or the day after she disappeared. Why do you not talk to him more when you find out he had scratches and shit all over him? Those can be defensive wounds. In May of 2022, Raymond Moody was arrested for obstruction of justice dating back to evidence from April 25th of 2009. While he was being held at the Georgetown County Detention Center, the FBI put the finishing touches on their investigation and contacted Dawn to share the recent developments. Based on Moody's cell phone data, they were able to place him at the same location at the same time as Brittanee. Security cameras caught a vehicle that matched Moody's in the area at the time of Brittanee's disappearance. And the cell phone data could not be disputed. Moody was with Brittanee on the night she disappeared, and his phone pinged at the boatyard landing on the Santee River, the same place where Brittanee's cell phone had pinged for the last time. It didn't take long for Moody to confess while in custody. He admitted that he'd sexually assaulted Brittanee and then strangled her to death. Afterwards, he'd taken her body out about 3 miles past the Sunset Lodge where he'd been living and buried her in a wooded area. If Moody's information was correct, Brittanee was dead before her friends and family had even arrived in Myrtle Beach. Though the confession matched the cell phone data, investigators wanted more. They wanted Brittanee. Shortly after Moody's confession, he directed them to the area where he'd buried her. On Monday, they started digging in the area, but they came up empty-handed. On Wednesday, when Dawn got into her car, a song by Lauren Daigle came on the radio titled Rescue. And the lyrics said, I will send out an army to find you. Damn it, Madison! In the middle of the darkest night, it's true, I will rescue you. I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of the hardest fight. It's true. I will rescue you. So, Dawn knew that investigators were still digging in the area. So she called them and told them to listen to that song while they searched. The next day, they found human remains that were determined to belong to Brittanee Drexel. And Dawn's heart felt relieved that she was finally able to answer the questions that had plagued her for so long, and she was finally able to lay her daughter to rest. On May 16th, 2022, Brittanee was finally brought home to Rochester. Her family and friends did not think that day would ever come. And I think a lot of us didn't either. You know, people who have followed this case, this was one of those cases that I just thought, you know, unless somebody just decides to come forward, we won't know where she is. And also that it wasn't even, you can't call it a theory that she'd been fed to alligators, but law enforcement was perpetuating that. Law enforcement was saying that happened. If that did happen, then you're never going to find her. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of assumed. Oh my God, just so sad. So sad. And it's sad, it's tragic, it's senseless, it's all those things, but it's also a relief that she's home, you know? Raymond Moody was charged with murder, kidnapping, and criminal sexual conduct. And people wondered how, on a crowded Myrtle Beach street, nobody saw anything strange that night. The prosecutor said he believes that Brittanee had gotten into Moody's vehicle willingly that night. Dawn said her daughter would not have wanted to walk that 1.5 miles again. She had just come from there. And so maybe she would have gotten into a car to get a ride. And then when they passed her hotel without stopping, Brittanee would have started to panic and realize what was going on. After the press conference announcing that Brittanee's remains had been located, her family and friends were brought to the location where she'd been found. While it was incredibly difficult to be in the area where she'd been left alone and buried, it also helped bring closure. Dawn felt that Brittanee had already been in the ground too long, And she made the decision to cremate her so the people who loved her. Y'all, I might just have to pause this recording and just go cry for a while. You know how sometimes you start crying and then you just sort of need to get it out? Like, maybe that's where I am. But, she wanted the people who loved her to have a piece of her. As a mom, I just do not know, like, how you do this. And I'm not diminishing anybody else in Brittanee's life who lost her, but gosh, I don't know how detectives do it. I don't know how prosecutors do it. I don't know how even defense attorney, like, I don't know how anybody involved in cases like these do it, because all you can think about are your babies. This is something you don't wish on anybody. And just to have to make those decisions for what? For what, Raymond Moody? So you could get a boner, you stupid motherfucker? Like, what the fuck? She was a little girl, 17. And other humans are not there for your gratification. These are human beings. And everybody around her has a life sentence. If only we had known he would go on to do something like this. I'm sorry, but with his history, there was no other outcome than this. There are a lot of things I think you can change. There are a lot of things that I think you can learn from and grow from and all those things. But being a pedophile, I have not seen one single solitary case where that has successfully been overcome. This type of behavior, this type of treatment of other humans, the complete disregard for life, kidnapping, I haven't seen it. But what I have seen is men get slapped on the wrist for that kind of stuff, and then they kill the next one because the ones before who lived ratted them out, identified them. We don't change the behavior. We make sure we don't get caught. They hide it better. Oh my God. So fucking pissed. In October of 2022, Raymond Moody pleaded guilty to his charges after waiving his right to a bond hearing and arraignment. I'm going to have to redo all of my makeup. The judge sentenced him to consecutive terms of 30 years on the charge of kidnapping and criminal sexual conduct and a life sentence on the murder charge. He will not be eligible for parole. Ever. He is currently serving his sentence at the Lieber Correctional Institute in Ridgeville, South Carolina. After Brittanee's case was closed, Dawn presented the FBI agents who ultimately found her daughter a pendant with a picture of Brittanee, and on the back, God dang, an inscription that read, "Thank you for finding me." Now, we're going to talk about why Brittanee likely got in the car. In September of 2024, Moody's girlfriend, remember he started having that affair with a woman named Angel? He was still with Angel at the time that Brittanee was killed. 56-year-old Angel Vouse pleaded guilty in federal court to charges of making false statements to a federal agent in regard to Brittanee's murder. It has been stated both by Angel and Raymond Moody that Angel was actually in the vehicle with Moody when he picked Brittanee up in Myrtle Beach. Reportedly, Moody asked Brittanee if she wanted to smoke marijuana with them and party, and that she willingly got in the vehicle. Moody took Vouse and Brittanee to a campsite in Georgetown County where he ultimately assaulted Brittanee and murdered her. I do not believe that he pulled over and said, "Hey," because sorry, but Brittanee's not going to look at you and want to go hang out with you. I don't think he leaned out the window and was like, "Hey, want to come smoke weeds with us and party with us?" I do not believe that for a second. I believe that she saw a man and a woman in a car, which made her feel disarmed. She needed a ride. She needed to get back to the hotel, and it was going to take her longer to walk. And so they said, "Hey, do you need a ride?" And she said, "I'm just going up, to here or whatever." And she felt safe because there was a woman with him, and she got in the car. I do not think that she had any intention of going and partying with them at all. She was trying to get to her hotel. Angel said she left the campsite prior to the assault and murder. How? Where'd you go? You took a car? Did you? Because you guys drove in a car there together. How the fuck did you get out of there, Angel? Is there somebody else with you? Or is this psychological distancing and you were there for all of it? She also said Brittanee had her cell phone with her, though FBI agents believe that Angel took the cell phone and dumped it between Georgetown and Charleston counties. A date for her sentencing has not been yet set, but she could face up to 24 years in prison. While it seems like we may never know exactly what led to Brittanee's murder on the night of April 25th, we do know who was responsible for her death. And we also know that if Raymond Moody had been held to serve his original entire sentence in California, Brittanee Drexel would very likely still be alive. She certainly wouldn't have been abducted and killed by Raymond Moody. Dawn has made peace with the fact that they may never have all of the answers. After Angel's hearing, Dawn told ABC 13, quote, "I don't ever think you get closure with losing a child. I think it's a resolution to what happened, and she will pay dearly for what she did to my daughter." Brittanee's case gained nationwide attention throughout the 13 years that it went unsolved. Her face and name became well recognized throughout the country, and her smile was infectious even through photographs. Those who knew her well say that Brittanee wouldn't want people to forget about her, and that she'd want to be remembered as what she was, a wonderfully kind, happy-go-lucky girl who could brighten up anyone's day when she walked in. And that's it. And I'm sorry, I also hope her, quote, friends that brought her there feel really fucking bad for treating her the way they did and then asking her to walk back by herself to get shorts. Those girls know you need like a buddy system. You need to be walking together, and you don't leave your fucking friend behind like that. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if you went and stayed somewhere with some of your friends, one of them who was walking alone at night, disappears and never comes back, and you say, well, not my problem, and you just leave. Could they have found her? No. Did they know what happened to her? No. But they knew that something was wrong. Why'd you invite her? I don't know. I'm not saying anything needs to happen to them. I'm not saying that we need to blast their names. I'm not saying that we need to find them on Facebook and send them angry messages. None of that. I don't think any of that needs to happen. But I do hope that they teach their daughters to be better friends than they were. And that's it. So let me know what you think. Sorry I cried so much. See you next week. If you like this episode, be sure to like this episode and follow the show so that you never miss out on new episodes. Get in on the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. You can find us at Killer Queens Pod, or you can join our Facebook discussion group at Killer Queens Podcast, where we discuss cases covered on the show and all things 90s. If you want to submit a case to be covered on the show, visit killerqueenspodcast.com/case submission and just complete the form. And if we cover the case, we'll give you a shout out on the show. Lilas.